You want to pass them out over on this side? Oh, yep, that'll be great. Okay. All right, I'm not exactly sure when the time started, but as I told somebody, it's a good distraction anyway. If we're delayed, that's fine, because we're delayed for a reason. Hopefully, each of you got a chance to tell our young men what a fantastic job they did, because it is a scary thing if you've never done it. Even though they know all of you, it's different when you get up there. So I'm proud of them, and I know you are too, especially the parents. Very proud of our young men. We are in Luke chapter 7 today. We'll also be touching on Matthew chapter 8, which includes this story as well. This particular account is when Jesus comes back to Capernaum and encounters a centurion's entourage with a question about a sick slave. So I'm going to read Luke 7, verses 1 through 10. When he had completed all of his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And a centurion's slave, who was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself any further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was with him, or that was following him, "I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. So in this particular case, we meet a man. Actually, we find out about a man. We don't meet him, a centurion. A centurion is a Roman soldier who was over 100 men, hence the name centurion, for the century being centurion. And there's several times in Scripture where we find that Jesus ministered to people who are not Jewish. I wrote down scriptures for several of them. This one, Luke 7, and as I said earlier, it's also in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus deals with a healing of a centurion's servant, and it's a healing at a distance. He doesn't go to him, but he says the word, and he is healed. In John 4, most of that chapter deals with Jesus talking with a Samaritan woman at the well, ministers to her, and then because of her testimony, he ministers to the entire house that she is from. And at the tail end of John chapter 4, a nobleman's son is healed. And again, that is a healing at a distance. Jesus doesn't go to that son, but rather he says it will be done, and it's done. In Matthew 15, also recorded in Mark 7, Jesus heals a Canaanite woman's daughter who was possessed by a demon. And again, healing at a distance. He tells her it's going to be done. When she gets back, she finds out her daughter was healed. And in Luke 17, verses 11 through 19, Jesus heals 10 lepers. We don't know about all the lepers, but there's only one that comes back to say thank you, and he is a Samaritan. And Jesus says, weren't there 10 healed? Where are the 9? So Jesus does minister to folks outside the Jewish religion. In this particular case, as I said earlier, he is coming back into Capernaum. This tends to be kind of his headquarters, where it's kind of like home base. As you remember, he was not welcome in Nazareth. They looked down on him in Nazareth. He couldn't get past being the little boy that he was there. They knew his family. They knew what he did. And he couldn't get past that in their eyes. So Nazareth was not going to be his home place, but Capernaum was. Now, this guy, centurion, as I said before, he's a commander of 100 men. There's one that we will meet later in Acts chapter 10, Cornelius, also a centurion, believed to be the first Gentile convert. And centurions are mentioned several times in the New Testament, both in the Gospels and in Acts. And every time they are spoken for in terms of praise. And there's a guy, a Jewish historian, that says centurions were chosen by merit. So they were men that were remarkable, not so much in their daring courage, but rather in their deliberation, in their constancy, and in their state of mind or strength of mind. So centurions we find many times. Again, I gave you a plethora of verses there. Here in Matthew and also in Luke, or here in Luke and also in Matthew, this centurion. But there's one at the foot of the cross. He's mentioned in Matthew, he's mentioned in Mark, and also in Luke. And both of them, or Matthew and Mark, report that the centurion testifies that this man, Jesus, was indeed the Son of God. Luke's account says he was a righteous man. It's the same centurion then that reports to Pilate, yes, Jesus is dead. And so then Pilate says to the individuals that are looking to take Jesus' body, okay, you can take his body. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. And I mentioned Cornelius being a centurion, a righteous and generous man in Acts chapter 10. There's a centurion that is taking care of Paul. As a matter of fact, he was going to exact some punishment on Paul, but he hears that Paul is a Roman citizen, so he goes and reports that to his higher folks and says, we better not flog this guy because he's a Roman citizen. So he prevents a miscarriage of justice. There's a centurion that helps prevent the murder of Paul in Acts chapter 23. Felix lassos Paul to a centurion in Acts chapter 24, gives Paul some freedom while he's still in imprisonment. And then Paul is placed under, and other prisoners too, under centurion Julius, one of the imperial regiments. So he's actually part of Caesar's own regiment there. And he also prevents the taking of Paul's life in Acts chapter 27. And other than the account we have here in Luke, we only have the account in Matthew. And Matthew's is sort of a condensed account, but it does take care of this same topic. The centurion was concerned about a servant. And here in Luke it says he was sick and he was about to die. Matthew adds that he was paralyzed and in terrible suffering. So you've got a servant who apparently is well regarded by the centurion. He is sick, he is paralyzed, he's in intense suffering, and he's about to die. So because he is so concerned about him, he sends word to Jesus. Verse 3 says that the centurion had heard of Jesus. And so he sends some elders of the Jews to go and talk to Jesus. We don't know if he ever actually listened to Jesus preach or if he had just heard the accounts. You know, the Romans took pretty tight control and I don't know if you'd call it spying, but they had their fingers into everything that was going on because they had to maintain peace. So they knew what was happening in this vicinity. And maybe it was just the reports that came back to him that this Jesus guy was performing miracles. I don't know. But when he heard Jesus was back in town, he's like, okay, let me send some of these elders to him and get him to come and talk to me. Now, Matthew's account kind of cuts out the middleman. It does not talk about the elders, but rather it says the centurion went to Jesus and requested him to come and heal his servant. There shouldn't be, and most folks do not consider that a conflict. If I send an ambassador to a country and he speaks on behalf of my country, it's the same as if the president went and spoke. He's speaking for the president. He's our ambassador. Well, it's the same here. When the elders go and speak on behalf of the centurion, it's just as though the centurion went and spoke to Jesus. So don't consider that a conflict. It's not. It's interesting, too, though, that Matthew, whose message is primarily aimed at a Jewish audience. He speaks to the faith of the centurion. Luke's message is aimed more at a Gentile audience, and he speaks more to the concern that Jesus has for the suffering of this individual. So he emphasizes mercy, whereas Matthew emphasizes more on faith. When the Jewish leaders come to Jesus, it says they pleaded earnestly for him to go because this man deserves to have you do this. Now, have you thought of anybody that deserves to have God's grace? Anybody? Yeah, I don't think so. Do you deserve God's grace? No, none of us deserve God's grace, but that is their plea to Jesus, is that you need to come. You must come because this guy deserves it. He deserves that. There's nothing said that we believe you can perform a miracle. There's nothing that says we believe you are Messiah. There's nothing that says we know you are a prophet. There's nothing that says we know you're a man of God. They don't profess anything about Jesus, but you need to come do this because he deserves it. He's done good for them, so you must return the favor for us. They tell Jesus that this man loves our nation and he has built a synagogue for us. You know, centurions, as I said before, they're men of character. This guy is a sterling example. And the Jewish leaders point out all the good things that he's done for them. As I mentioned earlier, you know, part of their job was to keep the peace. Well, if you build a synagogue for the people in that town, that's going to help get goodwill coming your way. It might also help people to, yield to your position as a leader and follow what you have to say. So they recognized that he loved the Jewish people. They also recognized that he loved his servant. And he had a concern, a heart of concern. So Jesus says, okay, I'll come. And so he starts out, he goes with them. And we're really left to wonder, why did Jesus go? Aren't you? I mean, it's kind of not a real strong reason for going with him. He deserves it. And Jesus knows good and well he doesn't. But Jesus also knows that sick individual, suffering paralysis, in extreme pain, about to die, he maybe deserves some kind of mercy. And certainly Jesus is the one that could do that. But my guess is that it was a lesson for the Jews. You know, he tells them in other places, you are busy tithing your mint, dill, and cumin when you overlook the weightier portions of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. They want to look good on the outside. And Jesus says you need to look good on the inside. He's always been more about that. Jesus would also tell them in Luke 5:31 and 32, that it is not those who are well that need a physician, but rather it is the sick that need a physician. And I came to call sinners to repentance. And Luke 19:10, he would say that his job was to seek and save those who are lost. So Jesus is going along. And apparently, as he gets near the house, the centurion sends some of his friends. And the friends tell Jesus, I'm not even worthy. I'm not even worthy to have you come into my house. Say the word, and it'll be done. See, I too am a man under authority. And I tell people to go and they go. I tell people to come and they come. I'll tell my servant do this and he'll do that. I understand that. Do you get the difference between this centurion and all those Jewish leaders that are with him? And what do you think's going through their mind right now when they say, we've arranged this, we've got this guy coming, he's going to do for you what you want him to do? Yeah. We owe him, And now he's saying he doesn't want it? I am not worthy. I do not deserve this. Wait a second. What did the Jews say? He deserves this. And what does he say? I don't deserve this. Wow. What? And the Jews said nothing about his ability. And yet the centurion says, you say the word and it's done. You give the word and it'll happen. I know that because I'm under authority, just like you're under authority, and I know that you can do this. What tremendous faith. It blows away the faith of these individuals because they don't have any faith. They just want him to come because the centurion said he should come. You get him to come. And they're saying he deserves this, and he's saying, I don't deserve this. Quite a different deal. I imagine the Jewish leaders now are confused. I also figure that they are probably scared because if they've arranged this and now the centurion says, don't come, is he going to exact something else from us because we did not honor his request? You know, they would be very, very reluctant to even enter into the centurion's house because they know that going into a Gentile house would make them, what? Ceremonially unclean. Doesn't make them unclean, but it makes them, quote unquote, ceremonially unclean. They didn't say anything to Jesus about, you don't need to go to that house because if you do, you're not going to be welcome in the synagogue for a week. Maybe they wanted that, you know. Well, if he goes in there, we're done with him for a week. He's not going to come into the synagogue and read like he's done before. Nothing was said about that. And they're not going, whew, we don't have to go into the centurion's house, right? Just say the word. It'll be done. He says, I don't deserve it. I'm not even worthy to come to you myself. That's why I had others do it for you. But you say the word, my servant will be healed. We're impressed by this man's great love. We're impressed by this man's great humility. Can you imagine a Roman officer telling a poor Jewish rabbi that he's unworthy to have this rabbi enter his house? Romans are not known for displaying humility, and especially with respect to those that they have control over. In this case, the Jews. Jesus has a twofold response. The first one is, he is astonished. He is amazed. He is filled with wonder, depending on the translation that you have. It may say amazed, it may say astonished. It may say he's left with wonder. But then the second one is, he tells the friends of the centurion, I tell you the truth, I have not found such great faith even in Israel. And he tells them, go your way, it will be done as you have believed. What faith? What faith? The centurion's faith is remarkable. After all, he's a Gentile. He's from a pagan background. He's not been raised up in Judaism. He's a Roman soldier. He's trained in self-reliance or self-sufficiency. And we have no evidence that he ever even heard Jesus preach. Maybe he's heard, like I said, rumors of this power that he has. Maybe he's heard some of the teaching that he has. We don't really know. Maybe he's heard specifically of some of the folks that were saved or made better, were healed by him. Don't really know. And certainly I think his soldiers have reported what's going on so that he can stay in touch. Now in Matthew's account in chapter 8, Matthew gives us a little bit more of what Jesus says on this account than does Luke. In Matthew chapter 8, verses 10 through 12, when Jesus heard this, he was astonished and said to those following him, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, that is, the Gentiles. Many will come from the east and west, and they will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That's exactly where the Jews wanted to be, right? They wanted to be with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They always talked about their forefathers. They always leaned back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now Jesus is saying, many are coming from all over, from the east and the west. People are coming from all over, and they will be at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he goes on to say, but the subjects of the kingdom, according to the NIV, the New American Standard and ESV both say sons of the kingdom. So we're talking about the Jews here. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a scary kind of thing. That's what we generally refer to as hell. Folks who should have the inside track. Folks who should know that this is Messiah. Folks who should know that he is God's representative. Folks that should know he is the prophet that was coming after Moses, like Moses, from one of their people. They don't recognize him. But people like the centurion, they recognize him, and they recognize his power. That would be a scary kind of thing if you were the elders of that group and you're listening to Jesus say, there's a bunch of strangers that are going to have their seat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you guys won't. You guys won't, because you're not listening to me. You're not following me. You're not doing what I say. Amazed is found about 29 times in the Gospels. Usually it is said about crowds or it's said about people. A few times it's said about the disciples and a couple times about the apostles. It is said one time about Pilate. He was amazed about Jesus too. And it's said 2 times about Jesus. Only twice. The first one is in a negative sense, Mark 6:4-6, where Jesus says only in his hometown, among his own relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor. And he would not do any miracles there except lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith, talking about the folks in Nazareth. Amazed at their lack of faith. New American Standard says wondered about their lack of faith. ESV says marveled at their lack of faith. And then the second account is here in Luke chapter 9. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, having such great faith. Matthew's account of the same thing used the word astonished in the NIV and marveled in both the NSV and the New American Standard. The characteristic that Jesus was most impressed with about this man was his faith. Twice in the gospel record, we're told that Jesus marveled. Once in the negative sense about Nazareth, once in the positive sense here in Capernaum about this centurion. He had great faith. There's only one other time that Jesus says somebody had great faith, and that was again to a Gentile person, the Canaanite woman whose daughter was healed. Demon-possessed daughter was healed by Jesus. He says of her, she is a woman of great faith. Only 2 people acknowledged as having great faith, both Gentiles. And both healed at a distance. So what happened? Well, when the servant goes home or when the centurion goes home, depending on the account, the servant is healed. This guy who was paralyzed in extreme pain on death's door was healed. That very same hour, it says. You know, Jesus makes quite a bit of a comparison between true faith and the faith of the Jews. In the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus kind of lays out how he expects his followers to live and what kind of people they ought to be, there's a verse that kind of is key. Almost every one of the commentators agreed. The key verse is probably Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. And it's one that everything else kind of spins around, because there he says, For I tell you that unless your righteousness exceeds that or surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And you can imagine the folks that are listening to him preach is like, well, if they can't get there, who can? But if you listen to his sermon, you know who can. Those who have the heart that is right, and they try to do what Jesus said. In Luke chapter 4, there's a sermon there that Luke records. I think it's the first one that he records in his gospel, but it occurs in Nazareth, and it's one that I've referenced already. But in Luke 4, verse 24, I tell you the truth, Jesus continued, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut up for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to the widow of Zarephath in the region of Sidon, which is Philistine territory on the coast. There were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. All the people of the synagogue were furious. This is in Nazareth. When they heard this, they got up, they drove Jesus out of the town. They took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him down the cliff. But he walked through the crowd and went on his way. Imagine that. That blows my mind. You are so angry, so bent out of shape at this testimony that Jesus had given them. Matter of fact, just before that, he'd read from the and he told them, he says, you've seen this fulfilled right here, right now, today. They got upset with that, and that's when he lambasted them with this one. Their response was to drive him out of the synagogue, drive him to the edge of the hill, and attempt to throw him off the hill. And then they couldn't find him because he walked right through their midst and went about his way. That would be scary to me, wouldn't it? You know, you're so angry and you're going to take this guy and you're going to kill him, and all of a sudden you can't find him, you can't see him, he's not there. Where'd he go? I don't know. He's walked on his way. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, Jesus heard this, he was astonished, and he said to those following him, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with so great faith. And this is what we read just a few minutes ago. I tell you that many will come from the east and the west, and they will take their place at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. Jesus is always concerned about the heart. The Jews were always concerned about the appearance. They wanted to be seen as holy. Ceremonial cleanliness was everything to them. Jesus was interested in the inner man. He was concerned with true or genuine faith. Now, Jesus made reference to Naaman being cleansed of his leprosy. And then we're studying on this thing with the centurion. And I thought, let's draw a comparison here. So I got you a little table on that handout. Comparison between the centurion and Naaman, going all the way back to 2 Kings 5. Their position. The centurion, he is a commander in the Roman army, over 100 soldiers. Naaman, he is the commander of the Syrian army. View of others, the centurion, he is well respected. Matter of fact, they say he is deserving of this deal, but he's a Gentile. Naaman, he is respected, he is honorable, the scripture says. He is also a Gentile. Assistance, the centurion was assisted by Jewish elders. Naaman was assisted by a little Jewish girl who was a slave in his household, who tells her mistress, I wish your husband was in Israel because there's a prophet in Israel that could take care of this leprosy. And that's how he finds Elisha. Man of God, willing to approach a Jewish prophet, in this case, Jesus. The man of God, willing to approach the Jewish prophet, Elisha, for Naaman. Response, the man of God, Jesus, responds positively to the request of the centurion. Naaman, the man of God, responds positively to the request of Naaman. Personal meeting. If you go by Luke's account, the centurion did not meet Jesus until after the healing took place, if he ever met Jesus. We don't know that he did. And with Naaman, Naaman does not meet Elisha before the healing take place. And again, we don't know if he ever met Elijah. You know, the word went through his servant. Part of the reason Naaman got a little bent out of shape. Assistance, the centurion was assisted by his friends. Naaman, he was also assisted by his friends. As a matter of fact, one of them said, you know, if he had asked you to do something heroic, you would have done it. Why not go dip in the Jordan River? That's a simple thing. Assisted by friends. The result, in both cases, request granted. The servant was healed of his illness. Naaman was healed of his leprosy. God's presence was revealed in both cases because nothing like this could happen unless God was involved. Jesus commends the centurion for his faith in God, and Naaman expresses his faith in God. Isn't that interesting how that lines up? I just thought that was really remarkable how those two accounts, so far apart, both about soldiers, both about Gentiles, and the request of God. You know, I said earlier, Luke was primarily writing to a Gentile audience. We know that, well, I guess we conclude that because of what we find in his gospel. I mean, the very first thing is that he traces the genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Adam. He doesn't just go back to Abraham, which would have been fine for the Jews, and if you look in Matthew's account, that's where the genealogy starts. But Luke takes it all the way back to God. The second thing that you'll notice is that he records the songs of Mary and Simeon, both of who allude to the salvation being extended to the Gentiles. But, you know, I mean, if you go all the way back to Abraham, the promise was made to Abraham that through his seed all nations would be blessed. Well, the song of Mary and the song of Simeon, both of which are recorded in Luke chapter 1, Mary's in Luke chapter 1, Simeon's in Luke chapter 2, both emphasize the salvation to the Jews. Luke also emphasizes Jesus' association with the Samaritans, which the Samaritans, of course, were a mixed breed. They were part Jew, but they were part Gentile. They liked to call themselves Jews when it was convenient. They thought they had a better way than the Jewish way, but Jesus included them also. The fourth thing is that this passage talks about the healing of a Gentile and the commending of the centurion for his genuine faith. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the healing of the Gentile woman, her daughter. And in the first sermon, the one that we touched on just a minute ago in Nazareth, he records the faith of the Gentiles versus the unbelief of the Israelites. Luke also writes his letter to a guy named Theophilus. You know, you'll find that in Luke chapter 1. You'll also find his second letter, Acts, written also to Theophilus. He calls him most excellent. Most excellent is a term that is reserved for the Roman officials. It's used of Festus and it's used of Felix in Acts. And it's also used of Theophilus. So most people feel like he was probably a Roman official. Most excellent being his title, or the title of honor given him. If not a Roman official, he was perhaps a man of wealth and good social standing and well respected. Luke is trying to explain to him, as he says, an orderly account of the life of Jesus. And then he would pick up with that in the book of Acts and talk about the Acts of the Apostles so that Theophilus could have confirmed for him exactly what he was looking for, that great faith in Jesus. The centurion revealed that he understood Jesus' authority more clearly than the Jewish elders. Faith and conviction of the centurion amazed Jesus. He is said to have great faith. Only two people, like I said, two people, both Gentiles, that Jesus says had great faith. The example of Jesus challenges us when we start making distinctions about other people. Jesus didn't draw lines. He didn't care about ethnic group. He didn't care about socioeconomic background. He didn't care which side of the tracks you were on. Matter of fact, he was often chastised for eating with what? Publicans and sinners. But as we've already said, who else could he eat with? That's all there is. We're all sinners. And Jesus was willing to stoop that low. And in this case, the servant of a centurion. Jesus expects us to love our enemies, to be generous in our attitude toward others, and to strive for a purity of heart. Jesus demonstrated God's merciful concern for all people, and he expects his followers to do the same. Thank you very much for your attention today. And next week, we are going to look at Matthew chapter 11, verses 20 through 30, the invitation of Jesus. Have a great rest of the day.